The living room in Diane Holloway's house was the kind of room that was designed to make you feel small. Everything in it was expensive and deliberately placed. The cream sofa. The tall bookshelves with books that had never been opened. The framed photographs arranged by size rather than by meaning. It was a room built for impressing people, not for living in. I had been sitting on the edge of that cream sofa for 20 minutes on the second Sunday of December when Diane called the family meeting that changed everything. She stood at the center of the room, holding a glass of white wine, and announced the details of her Christmas dinner party. She talked about the guest list. She talked about the decorations she had ordered from a supplier in another city. She talked about the table settings and the dress code and the impression she intended to make on the people she had invited. My spouse, her son Brendan, sat beside me. He was nodding along the way he always did in his mother's living room, like the nodding itself was a kind of protection. Then Diane stopped talking about decorations and looked directly at me. She said I would not be attending the Christmas dinner. She said it plainly, without softening it at all. She said I was too low class to be around the important guests she had invited and that my presence would create the wrong atmosphere for the kind of evening she was planning. I felt my face go hot. Then she mentioned the catering company she had booked. She said the name clearly and with obvious pride. Orchard and Table. She said it like the words themselves were proof of her sophistication, proof that she operated at a level most people only read about. My heart did something strange and immediate when I heard it. Orchard and Table was my company. I had named it myself 7 years ago, sitting at a kitchen table in a rented apartment with a notebook and a cup of cold coffee. I had built it from a borrowed commercial kitchen and 3 clients who trusted me before I had any real reason to ask for their trust. I had grown it year by year, event by event, until it had become the most requested luxury catering service in the city. Diane had no idea. She had booked my company for her Christmas dinner without knowing that the daughter-in-law she had just banned from attending was the person whose name was on every contract, every menu, every invoice she had signed. I sat very still on the cream sofa. I kept my expression neutral the way I had learned to do in Diane's living room over the 3 years of my marriage to Brendan. I had become good at neutral in this house. She kept talking. She was explaining to the room how much she was paying and how worth it every dollar was. I let her talk. I said absolutely nothing. She wasn't finished. Diane rarely was. She moved from the subject of catering back to the subject of me, which appeared to be the real point of the meeting. She said that people who worked in kitchens had a particular kind of limitation that couldn't be helped but also couldn't be ignored in a social setting. She said that class was something you were born into or you weren't, and that no amount of effort could substitute for the kind of upbringing that produced the right instincts. She was looking at me while she said all of it. I thought about the kitchen where I had learned to cook. My grandmother's kitchen. A small warm room in a house that was not large or expensive but was full of food and noise and people who showed up for each other. I thought about what my grandmother had taught me about feeding people. That a meal made with care was one of the most dignified things a person could offer another person. Diane thought working in a kitchen was something to be embarrassed about. She had no idea that the kitchen she was most impressed by was mine. Brendan shifted beside me. He gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. He said maybe it was better for everyone if I skipped Christmas this year. He said it would help avoid drama. He said he hoped I understood. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I picked up my bag and said I needed some air. The cold hit me as soon as I stepped outside. December in this city had a particular kind of cold that settled into your coat before you finished buttoning it. I walked to my car, got in, and sat with the engine off for a few minutes. The humiliation from the living room sat in my chest like something heavy. I had felt it before in that house. The small comments. The questions about my background that were framed as polite curiosity. The way Diane talked to me in front of other people versus the way she talked to everyone else. 3 years of Sundays in that cream living room. But this was the first time she had said it plainly in front of a room full of people. Too low class. I sat in the cold car and breathed. Then I opened the event management app on my phone. I had checked it that morning out of habit, reviewing upcoming bookings for December. There were 11 events on the schedule between now and the new year. I scrolled to Christmas Day. The event was listed under the client's name. Holloway, D. A luxury dinner for 38 guests at a private residence. Full-service catering including setup, service, and breakdown. Premium winter menu. Fully paid. The address was Diane's house. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then something shifted in my chest, quiet and certain. The contract had been signed 6 weeks earlier. Diane had booked through our website, the same way most clients did, filling out the event inquiry form and going through the standard consultation process with my event manager, Priya. Priya had handled everything. She had no reason to connect the client's last name to mine. Brendan and I had different last names, which I had kept after we married. There was no flag in the system. The contract covered everything. Full menu preparation, 3-course luxury dinner, staffing for setup and service, premium linens, custom centerpiece arrangement coordination, and a post-event breakdown and clean. The total came to $4,800, fully paid at signing. Cancelling it would mean a complete operational failure. We had already ordered the ingredients. We had already assigned the team. We had blocked out Christmas Day for this event on the staff calendar. Pulling out this close to the date would be a disaster for everyone involved and would go against everything I believed about how a business should treat its commitments. I was not cancelling. I sat in the cold car and thought about what I was going to do instead. I thought about Diane standing in her living room announcing that I was too low class for her Christmas table. I thought about what it would mean for her to have that dinner, with those guests, with that food she was so proud of paying for, and to discover exactly who had made it possible. I decided I would personally supervise the event. I had started Orchard and Table when I was 28 years old with a credit card that was already close to its limit and a stubbornness that my grandmother had told me was either my greatest gift or my most reliable problem depending on the day. The borrowed kitchen belonged to a church hall 3 blocks from my apartment. I had negotiated 4 hours of access on Tuesday mornings in exchange for providing food for the church's monthly community lunch. It was a good deal for both of us. My first 3 paying clients were a colleague from the restaurant where I had worked during college, a woman from my neighborhood who needed food for her daughter's graduation party, and a local business owner who had tasted something I brought to a community event and asked for my card. I had not had a card at the time. I made one that night on my laptop and printed it at the library. Diane had been calling Orchard and Table a food hobby for 3 years. She said it with a particular smile, the kind that was shaped like warmth but had no actual warmth in it. She said it whenever the subject of my work came up, which she always managed to redirect quickly to something she considered more worth discussing. She had never once asked how the business was doing. If she had, she would have learned that Orchard and Table had catered 417 events in the past 2 years alone. That we had a 5-star rating on every platform we appeared on. That 3 separate publications had named us the top luxury catering service in the city. She would have learned who she was dismissing. Priya called me on the Monday after the family meeting. She was my event manager and had been with the company for 4 years. She was organized, calm under pressure, and had a talent for managing difficult clients that I genuinely admired. She said she was calling to confirm the Christmas Day menu for the Holloway event. She said the client had requested a few additions to the original menu and she wanted to make sure I approved the changes before she confirmed them. I told her to go ahead and describe them. She listed the additions. A supplementary cheese board for the pre-dinner reception. An upgrade on the dessert selection to include 2 additional options. A request for a specific brand of sparkling water that had to be sourced from a specialty supplier. I approved all of it. Then Priya said there was something else she wanted to mention. She said the Holloway client was one of the more demanding clients she had handled in recent memory. Not impossible, she said carefully. Just particular. With strong opinions about how things should be done and a tendency to express those opinions frequently. I asked how frequently. Priya said 3 calls in the past 2 weeks. I told her I understood and that she had handled it well. She said she appreciated that. I didn't tell her anything else yet. I just thanked her and ended the call. The full picture came through over the next few days as Priya kept me updated on the client communications. Diane had called a 4th time to question the order of the table service. She had sent 2 emails asking whether the staff would be wearing appropriate uniforms. She had requested a revised copy of the menu layout so she could show it to guests in advance, which was not something we typically provided but which we accommodated because the client had paid in full and the request was manageable. She had also told Priya, on one of the calls, that she expected high-class service. She had said those exact words. High-class service. She said she had a reputation to maintain with her guests and that any failure to meet her standards would reflect poorly on the company. Priya had told her, professionally and warmly, that Orchard and Table had not once failed to meet its standards in 7 years of operation. Diane had said she hoped that was true. Then, on the most recent call, she had said something that Priya mentioned to me almost as an aside. She had told Priya that she expected the owner of the company to be personally present at the event. She had heard, she said, that the owner supervised major events directly. She wanted that level of attention for her dinner. She had demanded the owner. I read Priya's message summary and sat with it for a long moment. Then I smiled. She had demanded the owner. She was going to get exactly that. The team meeting for the Christmas event happened on the 22nd of December. Priya had assembled the full crew, 6 servers, 2 kitchen assistants, our lead chef Marcos, and the logistics coordinator who handled setup. They were all experienced. They had all worked major events together before. This was going to be one of the better organized Christmas dinners we had done. Priya walked them through the event brief. The address. The timeline. The menu. The client-specific preferences and the additional items that had been added since the original contract. Someone on the team made a quiet comment about the client being particular. Someone else said that was putting it gently. There was laughter. The comfortable, private laughter of a team that has handled difficult clients before and knows that the difficulty ends when the event is over and the reviews come in. They were good at their jobs. They were not worried. I stood at the side of the room listening and said nothing about my connection to the client. As far as the team knew, I was supervising this event because it was a large luxury booking and owner oversight was standard practice for events of this scale. That was true. It was also the complete picture as far as they needed to know it. I had decided not to tell them about Diane yet. I wasn't sure exactly when I would. But I knew the moment would arrive on its own. Brendan sent me a text message on the 23rd of December. It came in the afternoon while I was reviewing the final ingredient order for the Holloway event. The message said his mother hoped I understood why it was better this way. It said she wasn't trying to be hurtful but that the Christmas dinner was important for the family's standing in their social circle and that she needed everything to go perfectly. It said she thought I would be more comfortable spending the day with my own friends. Then it said the family's reputation was something he needed to protect too. I read the message twice. Then I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to the ingredient order. I thought about the reputation Diane was so concerned about. The reputation she had spent decades carefully constructing through the right parties and the right guests and the right catering companies. The reputation that depended on everyone in the room reflecting the image she had chosen. I picked the phone back up and typed a reply. I told Brendan not to worry. I told him I understood completely and that I would not be attending the Christmas dinner as a guest. I sent the message and set the phone down again. What I had written was entirely true. I was not going as a guest. Christmas preparations at Orchard and Table ran from the 23rd through the morning of the 25th. The premium ingredients for the Holloway event were delivered on the 23rd and checked against the order list by Marcos, who had the kind of attention to detail that made him invaluable for high-stakes events. The menu was a winter luxury spread. A butternut and sage soup to start, served in wide shallow bowls with a drizzle of truffle cream. A main course of slow-roasted beef tenderloin with port reduction and seasonal vegetables prepared 3 ways. A cheese course with the board Diane had requested as a late addition. And a dessert selection that included a dark chocolate fondant, a vanilla pear tart, and 2 additional options she had upgraded to. The specialty sparkling water had been sourced from the supplier Priya had tracked down. It was sitting in temperature-controlled storage alongside the wines and the non-alcoholic options. On Christmas Eve, Diane called again. She had added 4 guests to the final count. The total was now 42. She said she hoped this wasn't a problem. Priya adjusted the quantities and confirmed the change without complaint. She texted me afterward to let me know. I told her she was doing an excellent job. Diane had also, according to Priya's note, requested a small additional upgrade to the centerpiece arrangement at each table. She wanted white orchids added to the existing greenery. She said it was important. We sourced the orchids that same evening. On Christmas Eve afternoon, I was packing the final equipment when Priya came to find me. She looked mildly amused in the way she sometimes did when a client had done something she needed to share but couldn't quite believe. She said she had received a message through our client communication system. It was from Diane, sent to the general inbox. She had apparently also sent it as a voice message on the booking platform. In the message, Diane was telling someone at the company, though it was addressed generally, that she wanted her guests to know she had hired the best catering service in the region. She said she was sharing this because she wanted the team to understand the caliber of event they were working and to bring their best performance accordingly. She said she only hired elite services and that her guests would notice quality immediately. Priya said that several other staff members had seen the message and that the general reaction was a kind of polite amusement combined with professional focus. I listened to all of this and kept my face steady. Priya said one more thing. She said apparently the client had also been telling her guests in advance, through her own social channels, about the catering company she had secured. She had been posting about it. The company name had been mentioned. My company name. In Diane's posts. As evidence of her excellent taste. I thanked Priya and went back to the equipment. I looked over the full event documentation that evening. Client details, guest count, timeline, floor plan. The event was scheduled to begin with a pre-dinner reception at 6 in the evening, with the seated dinner starting at 7:30. The guest list, which Diane had submitted for logistical planning purposes, was notable. There were 3 local business owners I recognized by name. A city councillor and his wife. 2 couples who appeared regularly in the social pages of the regional lifestyle magazine. A retired judge. Several people whose surnames connected them to established families in the city. This was exactly the kind of gathering Diane had built her social reputation around. She had also sent a note through Priya specifying that the company's presence should be professional and discreet. She said she wanted it to look effortless. She said the guests should feel the quality of the service without the service drawing attention to itself. She said she was very relieved that everything would go smoothly without any awkward personal elements intruding on the evening. I read that last line twice. I understood what awkward personal elements meant. It meant me. It meant the daughter-in-law she had banned from the guest list 2 weeks earlier in her cream living room. She was relieved I wasn't coming. She had no idea I was already in her event file, listed as supervising staff. I made the decision about the uniform on the morning of Christmas Day, standing in front of my wardrobe at 6:30 while the rest of the city was opening presents. Orchard and table staff wore a clean, simple uniform for events. Black trousers, a fitted black jacket with the company logo embroidered in small silver lettering on the breast pocket, and a white shirt underneath. It was professional without being flashy. It was designed to communicate quality without demanding attention. I dressed in it carefully. I had worn this uniform to probably 60 events over the years, particularly in the early days when the team was small and I worked alongside everyone else. As the company grew, I had shifted into a supervisory role. I still wore the uniform when I was on site, because I believed the owner of a service business should look like part of the team, not like a visiting executive. Diane did not know what our uniform looked like. She had never attended one of our events as an observer. She had only ever been a client on paper. She would recognize me when she saw me. She would recognize my face immediately. But she would see me in a black catering jacket with orchard and table embroidered on it and she would not, at least not at first, understand what she was looking at. I buttoned the jacket and checked my reflection. I looked like exactly what I was. The orchard and table van pulled up outside Diane's house at 4:15 in the afternoon. The house was large, set back from the street behind a low stone wall with an iron gate that stood open. The front path had been lined with small white lights that were already on even though it was still afternoon. Marcos was in the lead vehicle with the kitchen equipment and the cold storage units. Priya was in the second van with the serving staff and the table linens. I rode in Priya's van. We pulled up and began unloading with the smooth efficiency that came from doing this many times. The event was in 3.5 hours and we had a full setup to complete before the first guest arrived. Brendan had texted me that morning to say Merry Christmas. Nothing else. I had replied the same. The front door of the house opened while we were carrying the first equipment through the service entrance on the side of the house. I saw Diane come out onto the front steps in a deep green dress with her hair set and her jewelry already on. She looked prepared for the evening and also, from a distance, like a woman who was ready to manage every detail of something she was very proud of. She walked toward the catering vehicles with the purposeful stride of someone who had been waiting to inspect things. She got close to the first van and began looking at the equipment. She had not looked at me yet. She spent several minutes examining the cold storage units as Marcos and 2 of the kitchen staff carried them through the side entrance. She asked Marcos a series of questions about temperature control and he answered each one professionally and patiently. Then she walked toward the table linen setup in the dining room and began telling Priya that the placement wasn't quite what she had envisioned. I was nearby, overseeing the positioning of the service station. Diane turned from Priya to gesture at the table arrangement, and as she turned, she saw me. Her expression did something complicated in the space of about 2 seconds. Recognition arrived first. Then confusion. The 2 things sat on her face simultaneously, which created an expression that was not quite either. She knew my face. She had been looking at my face for 3 years of Sunday lunches and family gatherings and the occasional event she could not avoid including me in. But I was standing in her dining room on Christmas Day in a black catering uniform with orchard and table embroidered on my chest. She stared at me. I held her gaze calmly and said good afternoon. She said nothing for a moment. Then she gathered herself and said, with a tone that was clipped but controlled, that she didn't realize I worked in this industry. I told her I was part of the catering team tonight. She looked at my uniform one more time. Then she said, with a short, dismissive sound, "Of course you'd fit in here." She turned back to Priya and resumed her discussion about the table arrangement. She did not make the connection. I watched her move through the dining room for the next 20 minutes, adjusting napkin folds and questioning the placement of the orchid centerpieces, and I understood that in her mind she had filed me into a category and closed the drawer. I was the daughter-in-law who worked in catering, who apparently worked for the company she had hired. This was, to Diane, not surprising. It confirmed something she had always believed about me. That my world was the service world. That I belonged in the background of evenings like this one. She gave me a direct instruction at one point. She pointed at a chair near the entrance to the dining room and said it needed to be moved 6 inches to the left. She said it in the tone she used with people she considered beneath her consideration. Not rude exactly. Just completely impersonal. I moved the chair. She nodded without looking at me and moved on. Priya glanced at me from across the room. She had noticed the exchange. She had also noticed, I could see it in her expression, that this client seemed to know me personally and was treating me as though that familiarity was something to be leveraged rather than acknowledged. I gave Priya a small, reassuring nod. Then a guest who had arrived slightly early, a tall woman in a silver blazer, appeared in the doorway of the dining room and looked around with interest. She looked at me and asked if I was the event manager for the evening. I told the woman in the silver blazer that I was overseeing the event, yes, and asked if I could help her with anything. She introduced herself as Claudette, and I recognized her name from the guest list. She was one of the business owners I had identified when I reviewed the documentation. She ran a consultancy that had been written about in the same regional publication that had covered orchard and table. She said the setup looked beautiful. She said she had been to events catered by Orchard and Table once before, at a corporate function the previous spring, and that the food had been remarkable. I thanked her and said I was glad to hear it. Diane had moved closer during this exchange, adjusting something on the sideboard nearby. Close enough to hear. Claudette asked about the menu for the evening. I described the courses briefly. The butternut and truffle soup. The beef tenderloin with port reduction. The cheese course and the dessert selection. Claudette said it sounded exceptional. Then Diane stepped in. She said she had been very particular about the catering company she chose and that she always insisted on quality for her events. She said it was about knowing who the best people were. She gestured in my general direction without looking at me directly. She said the workers tonight were very capable. The word workers landed in the room exactly the way she intended it to. Claudette looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I smiled at her and said I was glad the menu was appealing. The reception hour began at 6. The guests arrived steadily, filling the house with the particular hum of a well-attended dinner party, conversations overlapping, glasses being collected, the smell of the soup beginning to reach the dining room from the kitchen. Marcos had the kitchen running flawlessly. The timing was precise. The first course was plated and ready to go at exactly 7:20, giving the team 10 minutes before service was needed. I was coordinating the service station near the kitchen entrance when I heard a staff member, one of the newer servers named Theo, say something to a guest near the drinks table. The guest had asked how the company operated at such a consistent level for events like this. Theo, who was enthusiastic and genuinely proud of his work, said that one of the things that made Orchard and Table different was that the owner was personally involved in every major event. He said the owner had very high standards and that being on site herself made a real difference to how the team performed. I heard Diane's voice from across the room, sharp and immediate. She asked Theo what he had said. He repeated it, slightly uncertain now, the way people sound when they aren't sure if they said something wrong. Diane straightened. She asked, in a voice that carried clearly above the ambient noise, where the owner was. Several guests near her turned. I stayed where I was. The room did not go silent all at once. It shifted. The conversations nearest to Diane thinned as people became aware that something was happening. She had asked the question loudly enough that the staff members closest to her had all heard it. Theo looked uncertain. Priya looked across the room at me with an expression that was completely professional and completely alert at the same time. Diane asked the question again. She said she had specifically requested the owner be present. She said she had been told that was a standard practice. She said she wanted to speak with the owner directly about several aspects of the service. There were maybe 15 guests within reasonable hearing distance at this point. The counselor and his wife, Claudette, who had found a position near the fireplace with a glass of wine. 3 other couples. The retired judge, who had the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where important things were said. I set down the notepad I had been holding. I walked toward the center of the room. The team watched me. Priya watched me. Theo watched me with the expression of someone who has just realized they may have accidentally started something significant. Diane was looking around the room impatiently, her eyes moving from one staff member to the next, waiting for someone to point her in the right direction. I stepped forward into the space where she could see me clearly. I said her name. She turned toward the sound of my voice with the impatient expression still on her face, ready to redirect whoever was interrupting her toward the information she wanted. I told her calmly that the owner was already present. She looked at me. She said, with clear irritation, that she didn't have time for riddles and that she was simply asking where the owner of the company was so she could speak to them. I told her she had been speaking to them all evening. She stared at me. I kept my expression steady. I kept my voice level. I had rehearsed nothing. I was simply standing in a room I had staffed and saying a true thing. She looked at my jacket. At the Orchard and Table logo embroidered in small silver letters on the chest. She looked at my face. She looked at the jacket again. I watched the information travel through her. It moved slowly, the way a difficult truth sometimes moves, not because the person receiving it is unintelligent but because the idea is so far outside what they were prepared for that the brain keeps checking it against what it already knows. A guest near the fireplace said something quietly to the person beside them. Diane said nothing. The room had gone almost entirely quiet. I introduced myself clearly and fully. I said my name and I said that I was the founder and owner of Orchard and Table and that I had been personally supervising this event since the team arrived that afternoon. I said it in the same tone I would use at any business event. Professional. Direct. Warm, but not seeking anything. The room processed it in layers. First the staff, who already knew and who had been watching this moment approach with the composed interest of people who trusted their employer. Then the guests closest to me, who made the rapid calculation from the company name to the reputation they associated with it. Then the guests who had been further away, who leaned slightly in as the information spread. Claudette's face broke into a wide, genuine smile. She said she had had no idea. She said the food at the event she had attended the previous spring had genuinely been the best catered meal she could remember, and that knowing I was behind it made complete sense. The retired judge said he had seen the company name written up in 2 separate publications, and that it was apparently extraordinarily well regarded. Several other guests were nodding. Recognition was moving through the room like warmth. And in the center of all of it, Diane Holloway stood completely still in her deep green dress with her hair set and her jewelry on and her face the color of the white orchids in the centerpieces. The questions came quickly after that. Guests moved toward me with the natural interest that follows a story they hadn't expected. They asked how long the company had been operating. They asked about the menu approach. They asked how I had developed the luxury catering concept and what made the company different from others they had used. I answered everything the way I always did. Honestly and with genuine enthusiasm for the work itself. I talked about the winter menu and the sourcing philosophy. I talked about what it meant to build a company from a borrowed kitchen to the scale we were operating at now. I talked about the team, because they deserved that acknowledgement, and I gestured toward Priya and Marcos and the staff who were quietly and expertly delivering the first course to the tables. The food, everyone agreed, was beautiful. Claudette said she intended to call the company in January about an event she was planning. 2 other guests said the same. The counselor's wife said she had been looking for a caterer for a spring fundraiser and that this had answered her question. I thanked each of them warmly and genuinely. Diane had not moved from her position at the center of the room. She was smiling now. It was the smile I recognized from 3 years of Sunday lunches. The one shaped like warmth with no warmth underneath it. She was trying to perform graciousness, but the performance had too many things to compete with. She said she had always admired my work ethic. Several guests who had heard what happened earlier looked at her quietly. The dinner was served at 7:30 as planned. Marcos and the team executed every course with the precision I had come to expect from them. The soup was smooth and fragrant. The beef tenderloin was exactly right. The cheese board was arranged beautifully. The desserts arrived on time and looked, as Claudette said with genuine feeling, like something from a very good restaurant. The guests were happy. The evening had the comfortable warmth of a well-fed room full of people who had been surprised by something they hadn't expected and were enjoying what that felt like. Brendan found me near the service station during the dessert course. He had been at the far side of the house for most of the evening, and I suspected he had known, or at least sensed, what was happening. He looked at me with an expression that was doing several things at once. He said he was sorry. He said he should have defended me. He said he had known for a long time that his silence was a kind of agreement with his mother's version of things and that he was sorry it had taken this long for him to say that directly. I listened to him. I told him I appreciated it. I didn't tell him it was enough. I didn't tell him it wasn't. That was a conversation for another evening. One that didn't belong to his mother's Christmas party. I thanked the guests as they moved toward the door at the end of the evening. I thanked them for coming and for their kind words about the food. Not one of them mentioned Diane's comments from earlier. They didn't need to. The post-event breakdown was finished by 11:30. The team loaded the equipment back into the vans with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times and were good at ending an evening cleanly. Priya and I stood outside for a moment while the last van was being locked. The night was cold and clear. The white lights along the front path were still on. She said it had been one of the better run events we had done in recent memory. I said I agreed. She said she had figured out the connection about halfway through the evening. I said I thought she might have. She didn't ask me to explain anything. She just said that whatever had happened in there, the food had been exceptional and the team had been outstanding, and that was always the part that mattered most. I told her she was right. In the days that followed, 3 bookings came in from guests who had been at Diane's dinner. Claudette called on the 28th of December and booked a full corporate event for March. The counselor's wife called on the 30th about the spring fundraiser. A third guest I hadn't spoken to directly had found the company through the name she had remembered from the evening. Diane did not call. I did not expect her to. At the next family gathering, a small and quiet thing in January, she did not mention the Christmas dinner. She did not mention the company. She spoke to me carefully, In the way people speak when they are aware that something has changed and they have not yet decided what to do about it. I was polite. I was present. I did not need anything from her. The company that she had called a food hobby was one of the most requested catering services in the city. I had built it from a borrowed kitchen with cold coffee and stubborn belief in what a meal made with care could mean to the people sitting down to eat it. She had tried to keep me out of her Christmas. Instead, she had handed me the room.